whether they ruined the rest of the movie or simply torpedoed a single scene. Each of these bold decisions left audiences scratching their heads and wondering what the hell the often world-class filmmakers involved were thinking. From dodgy digital de-aging to shockingly poor camera work, unhinged casting choices, and everything else in between. These movies all took bold swings that just didn't even remotely pay off. So I am Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 risky movie moments that totally failed. Number 10, Robert De Niro's geriatric fight moves, The Irishman. Martin Scorsese's The Irishman ranks among the director's boldest and most ambitious projects. If only because he used comprehensive digital de-aging effects to have Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci portray the crime drama's central characters at numerous stages of their lives, often many decades apart. For the most part, the effect is incredibly impressive, and largely vaults over the uncanny valley. Though there's one infamous meme-worthy scene which painfully underlines the limitations of digital de-aging. Beyond using CGI to make his actors appear younger, Scorsese bafflingly refused to use stand-ins for any scenes commanding a greater sense of physicality from the cast. And so, for the sequence where a middle-aged version of De Niro's protagonist Frank Sheeran beats up a grocery store owner, it's painfully obvious we're watching a 70-something De Niro make a rather unconvincing, stiff-bodied attempt at pretending to assault someone. No matter how persuasively someone's face can be de-aged by CGI, it cannot disguise how age affects an actor's body, gait, and how they generally carry themselves. And so, by having De Niro act out the scene himself rather than pasting his face over a middle-aged body double, the scene was rendered a pure laughingstock. Above all else, why not just shoot the scene in close-up from below, rather than blatantly exposing De Niro's frailty in a flat wide? Very odd indeed. Now, while this particular piece of de-aging may not have been all that successful, what do you feel is the best piece of digital de-aging we've ever seen on the big screen? You let me know in the comment section down below. Number 9, the GoPro footage, The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. The middle chapter of the Hobbit trilogy, The Desolation of Smaug, saw director Peter Jackson make one incredibly jarring and out-of-place stylistic choice, including GoPro shots in the sequence where the heroes escape their captors by riding along a raging river in a set of wine barrels. Ah, what a life. It's a fun sequence in theory, albeit one rendered infamous due to the occasional presence of low-resolution GoPro shots. Now, GoPros are certainly quality consumer cameras for folks wanting to preserve memories of their holidays to post to YouTube, but in a $250 million blockbuster that can easily afford proper cinema cameras and elaborate rigging, it can't help but seem a bit lazy. Even accepting that GoPros can be quickly and easily positioned in ways that bulky movie cameras can't, the blurry, low-quality result sticks out like a sore thumb in a fantasy epic like this, especially compared to the more conventionally cinematic imagery produced by the proper cameras. What a weird choice. Number 8, heroes playing themselves, The 1517 to Paris. The 1517 to Paris is certainly one of the more forgettable movies in the great Clint Eastwood's directorial oeuvre, but it'd be even less memorable were it not for Eastwood's strangely and hilariously unnecessary creative dice roll to have the story's real-life heroes play themselves in the lead roles. The film is a dramatization of the 2015 Thalys train attack, in which a man opened fire on board a train from Amsterdam to Paris, but was ultimately stopped by 3 American men, Spencer Stone, Anthony Sadler, and Alex Skarlatos. As a result, the attacker was apprehended before he could cause any casualties. Despite Eastwood reportedly eyeing Kyle Gallner, Jeremy Harris, and Alexander Ludwig to play Stone, Sadler, and Skarlatos, he ultimately decided to just have the 3 men play themselves. Though it is a bold and intriguing experiment to see 3 real-life heroes reenact their own headline-making act, it ultimately just isn't one that works at all. The trio are not experienced actors, and it shows, even if the script admittedly doesn't give them all that much to work with. Would hiring actual actors to portray the 3 men have transformed The 1517 to Paris into a great film? Absolutely not, but it would have surely felt a little less empty. Number 7, All the Dutch Angles, Battlefield Earth. Granted, making a sci-fi movie that's thinly veiled Scientology propaganda is a pretty big risk in of itself. and one that unsurprisingly tanked critically and commercially. But the Razzie-winning Battlefield Earth didn't even deliver basic competence in the cinematography department either, as director Roger Christian ill-advisedly insisted that almost every shot in the film be set at a Dutch angle. A Dutch angle is when the camera is canted to the side, and while it can certainly be used effectively to convey a sense of unease, it's generally deployed sparingly by filmmakers given that its overuse can make a scene look a bit silly. But in an apparent attempt to replicate the aesthetic of a comic book, Christian made sure almost every single shot in Battlefield Earth was Dutched. It's ultimately just another reason to ridicule an already terrible movie. But even if Battlefield Earth was somehow good, the perma-Dutch style would be a massive distracting mark against it, making it difficult to take it even remotely seriously. Number 6. Killing John Connor, Terminator Dark Fate. It's tough to recall a film torpedoing its own potential more quickly than Terminator Dark Fate, which in its first 3 minutes quite literally terminated fan interest in most everything that followed. Dark Fate committed the cardinal sin of killing off the series' focal hero in a misguided attempt to basically soft reboot the franchise with a new protagonist. An opening 1998 flashback shows a young John Connor being shot and killed by another T-800 sent back through time by Skynet, wiping him out before he can become the great leader of the human resistance. Given that the first 2 Terminator movies were entirely concerned with ensuring John's birth and survival, to murder him in the new film's very first scene, and then swiftly introduce a replacement resistance leader, Danny Ramos, understandably left a sour taste in the mouths of long-suffering fans. To deliver a direct sequel to Terminator 2 only to kill off its most cherished character? Nah, this just ain't it. Couple this with a ludicrously huge $196 million budget, and it's no surprise at all that Dark Fate sank like a stone at the box office. Cheers for stopping by to check out this risky video today. Now take less of a risk and hit that subscribe button for more What Culture in your life. Number 5. No Dialogue, Silent Night. John Woo's recently released action thriller Silent Night stars Joel Kinnaman as Brian Godlock, a man seeking revenge for his son's murder in a drive-by shooting. An incident which also saw Godlock himself shot in the throat, causing him to lose his voice. And so Godlock is a silent protagonist. An intriguing idea and quite the acting challenge for Kinnaman, forcing him to emote and convey the story largely through his facial expressions and body language. Except Woo made the bizarre decision to have almost the entire movie be bereft of dialogue. Even when Brian is in rooms with other characters, namely his wife, there's an awkward lack of dialogue which doesn't really make much sense at all. After all, characters should still speak to Brian even if he can't talk back. But Woo ultimately overcommitted to the silence gimmick enough that it became a silly distraction. Granted, the movie has numerous other issues, namely an undercooked narrative and mostly mediocre action sequences, but it's the oppressive omission of almost all dialogue that totally dooms it. Number 4. Shooting Wide Open, Army of the Dead. For his Netflix zombie actioner Army of the Dead, director Zack Snyder also ambitiously served as his own cinematographer, and bolder still opted to shoot the majority of the film wide open. In cinematography terms, wide open means filming with the widest aperture possible, which on the vintage Canon 50mm f/0.95 rangefinder lenses Snyder used, ensured an extremely narrow, razor-thin depth of field. While Snyder intended to give Army of the Dead a dreamlike feel with this approach, many viewers complained about it looking blurry and constantly out of focus, with Snyder's crew understandably struggling to pull consistent focus with such a tiny window of clarity. You won't find many defending Snyder's artistic choices in this one, even if it does give the movie a unique aesthetic. Just one that most seem to consider more of an eyesore than a worthwhile characteristic. If not for the sake of the audience, then for the sake of your crew, Zack, never do this again. Thankfully, he didn't bother shooting both Rebel Moon movies wide open, so that's something they've got going for them. Number 3. Weaponized Autism, The Predator. On paper, the prospect of Shane Black writing and directing a new Predator movie seemed like it could not miss. And then it came out. Though most of the film marks a thoroughly mediocre attempt to blockbusterize the sci-fi action franchise, its biggest gamble was a subplot involving, wait for it, weaponized autism. For much of the story, we're led to believe that the ultimate predator is hunting soldier Quinn McKenna in order to harvest his DNA, until we learn that it's actually after his autistic son, Rory. It's suggested that the predator is targeting Rory because it believes that harvesting his autistic DNA will allow it to become a smarter, better hunter. Rory is himself depicted as something of a child prodigy, being able to partially decipher the Yautja language, before embarking on an accidental demolition spree when he unlocks a captured predator helmet. What is he like, eh? Though Black surely intended no offense with his portrayal of autism in The Predator, he totally bungled it in the end, repeating stereotypes while delivering what James Ward Sinclair of Autistic and Unapologetic called the most ill-informed backhanded compliment the autistic community will ever receive. Yikes. Number 2, that awkward needle drop, It Chapter 2. Centuries from now, humanity will still be trying to make sense of that needle drop in It Chapter 2. When an adult Eddie is attacked by the leper, it suddenly vomits black liquid in his face to the tune of Juice Newton's Angel of the Morning. The song's chorus blares out for just 5 seconds, cutting off as abruptly as it began. And while you can generously call this a flourish of bizarre dark humor from director Andy Muschietti, it's a moment that left most viewers more baffled than amused. This felt less like a sudden comedic interlude in an R-rated horror movie than a goofy fan remix that somehow made it into the final film. If Muschietti simply wanted to leave people scratching their heads, then perhaps he partially succeeded. But in a disappointing film already stuffed with so much excess, this felt like yet another needless filmmaker indulgence. And number 1, the colon shot, Cherry. Creative camera work can absolutely help elevate a movie, but the Russo brothers' Cherry is also proof perfect that uniqueness isn't always a good thing. During an early scene where protagonist Cherry is shown enlisting in the army, he undergoes a medical exam. And when the doctor shines a torch up his back passage, we are treated to a POV shot inside his colon. Because why the hell not? There are certainly movies where a shot like this would absolutely work. A gross-out comedy, for example. But in Cherry, it really just exemplifies how poor a handle the Russos had on the story's overall tone. This crime drama about a PTSD-afflicted, drug-addicted, bank-robbing war veteran has many moments of jarringly cartoonish, wacky humor like this, and almost none of them land at all. On the other hand, Cherry's butthole POV shot was quickly memed to death, and is basically the only thing anyone actually remembers about the movie these days. So that's something, I guess, yeah.